I'm sure none of you are surprised that there has been another wave of anti immigration rhetoric following the report. Some are blaming immigration for the crisis of youth unemployment. The Young SPD said this. A labour market afflicted by the latest migration wave in British history, brackets the Boris wave, was bound to make entry level and part time jobs scarce for our generation. We shouldn't have to be sending hundreds of applications to get an interview. Total mismanagement. GB News also gave their verdict, and you won't be surprised with what they said.
27 migrants from outside of Europe are being hired for every one British young person. That's according to new analysis from the Centre for Social Justice. And yet today, it seems to me that Labour grandees have set out a report blaming them, the British kids, for not being able to get into jobs. The gaslighting by the far left and globalist ideologues continues, doesn't it? They want you to blame your children while they import millions of low-skilled migrants from outside our country, suppressing our wages, hemorrhaging our GDP per capita, and taking jobs that should be going to your kids and your grandkids. While 1 million young Brits are described as NEETs, not in education, employment or training, costing taxpayers £125 billion a year, Milburn claims there's no evidence. Migration is a primary driver of this crisis. What a convenient blind spot from a report that refuses to face the numbers.
Alex Armstrong mentions it in that clip from GB News there, but this stems from a counter report from the Centre of Social Justice claiming immigration is the cause of youth unemployment. They said the crisis in youth worklessness is being fueled by mass immigration. The number of non-EU workers aged under 25 on UK payrolls rose by 355% since January 2020, while the young British workforce grew by just 0.3%, according to think tank the Centre for Social Justice. CSJ analysis of new HMRC payroll data shows that the number of non-EU migrants on payrolls aged under 25 rose from 82,000 in January 2020 to 370,000 in December 2025, an increase of 290,000. Over the same period, the number of UK national under 25s on payrolls increased by just 11,000, while the number of under 25s not in employment, education or training NEET surged by almost 200,000. The Centre for Social Justice is a centre-right think tank and was set up by Conservative MP Ian Duncan Smith. But to contradict the think tank, Alan Milburn, the author of the Youth Unemployment Report, said that immigration was not the reason.
We found no evidence that there is a link between levels of migration and higher levels of NEETs. Employers are going to be offering jobs to young Brits before migrants for a very simple reason, that there's a bigger pool now of unemployed, not in education and employment Brits, than there are migrants coming in. So honestly, the equation has changed. So I think, you just got to get this sort of couched in the right way, because honestly, it's one of those issues, it's a blame game issue. We just sort of blame immigration as the problem. It's not really, it isn't. So I think that is the right way to frame it.
Curtis, I have a feeling what you might say, but is immigration fueling youth unemployment?
No, it's not. That clown on GB News saying that but the problem is immigration, and Alan Milburn came up with a report that said it's not to do with immigration, and his response was, he's gaslighting young people. If this guy read the report, Alan explicitly says the fault is not of young people. It's not because they're lazy. It's the system, it's the economy. So he's not blaming British people for this. And he's found no correlation between immigration and lower levels of employment. Now, the think tank, as you pointed out, the Centre for Social Justice, is a centre-right think tank started by Ian Duncan Smith. I had a read of it to see where did they come up with their correlation. What they've done is essentially stated two facts or two figures, which is that employment for Brits has gone down, employment for immigrants has gone up. But correlation isn't always causation. In fact, in this case, it really, really isn't. They didn't have any other data to suggest that the two were linked. They're not actually. First of all, when it comes to young people not being in work, the report spells out that's because of mental health issues. So it's not the fault of immigrants that young people in this country are suffering from mental health. Yet this so-called think tank suggests that's the case. They also don't mention anything about the sort of jobs, because you can't say that levels of employment for Brits and for immigrants, it means it's linked, if you can't demonstrate that the same people are going for the same jobs. If they're competing for the same jobs, and not just that, but if you have a British person and an immigrant who has the same quote unquote level of skill and experience, and that person lost out to an immigrant, those are signifiers to suggest maybe higher amounts of immigration could be linked to higher unemployment for British people. But they didn't do that work. They literally just took two numbers and went, oh, it must be immigration. And that was it. That was the worst report I've ever seen. That's not a report. That is the journalistic level of what GB News is, basically. So why is immigration not linked to unemployment? What people miss, I think, when talking about the economy is they believe that the economy and jobs is finite. They think there's a finite amount of jobs, okay? And the more people that come to this country, the more people are fighting over the finite amount of jobs. That's because they have a very surface level reading of how the economy works. Economies expand and contract, okay? That's why they call it economies of scale. States expand and contract. Have you ever heard of the argument that, well, immigrants coming over here put a strain on public services? Well, they don't. Why? Because migrants who come here put more into the system. They pay more into the system than they take out. If they're working, that's higher tax receipts. So yes, there will be more people using public services, but there's also more tax receipts to spend for more people. So you can look at Denmark and say, well, they have less amount of people. Their economy wouldn't be any different to ours if we had the same policy. Some people like to say, oh, Denmark and Sweden, all these Nordic countries, they have better economies because they have lower levels of immigration. No, it's because the policies are different. It's because they have stronger trade unions. They have stronger collective bargaining. The amount of people in this country, it's all relative, okay? Yes, you have more people in this country, but more tax receipts to spend more on public services. No one also talks about the demand side of immigrants. So when immigrants come over here, again, as they put more into the system, because most of them are working, not claiming benefits, the overwhelming majority who are claiming benefits are British people. Therefore, immigrants are very, very demanding in terms of spending. So when they go out and spend money, that adds to the demand for businesses. As I said earlier, when people have enough money to spend into the economy, businesses make more money, they make more profits. That's what's happening with immigrants. So immigrants coming over here creates more jobs. That's what I said. It's all relative. So there is not a finite amount of jobs in this country. They expand and contract. And the reason at the moment why we have not enough jobs to go around is simply because companies don't want to invest. They want to. I mean, in a capitalist economy, the CEOs want to spend as little money as possible to make the most amount of profit. I don't know if you've ever worked on a shop floor in retail, or if you worked in a bar. The amount of times that you've been there in that situation is really, really busy, and you're thinking, we need more staff. But you don't get to make the decision. You're just a number on a spreadsheet. The CEO gets to make that decision. Well, he would rather workers working at overcapacity all of the time because they get to save on labor costs, even though it's probably better for the customer, for the worker, and maybe even for the overall profits of a particular store if there's more people. So if you've got one member of staff and you've got 5 to 10 customers, maybe investing in that extra member of staff could mean that they could speak to more customers and maybe bring in more money. But of course, when it comes to capitalism, and when your job as a CEO is to generate as much value for shareholders, you're not thinking long term. You're typically thinking, year to year, how much have we spent, how much have we brought in? It's all about quick profits. So that's why, because we leave the decisions to the rich people, that's why we don't have enough jobs. And of course, because wages are so low in this country, that demand is also low. So once again, we need to redistribute wealth and power. Ordinary people need to have more money, and we also need to have collective ownership. We need to start having more democracy in the workplace, because the experts of a company are those that actually do the work. Again, I'll refer to working in retail. If you're working on the shop floor, that person knows more about that job and that particular store than the CEO at the top. Again, the CEO is just looking at the spreadsheet thinking, I'm going to punch in some numbers. Whereas the person on the front line knows, we need more staff, we need this, we need that. So if we had the actual experts making the decisions, we'd also have better outcomes. But that's a democratic workplace, i.e. socialism.
Well, it's actually mad because I feel like the right wing and GB News in particular will literally blame immigrants for absolutely everything. Like, I actually reckon if there's like a hosepipe ban this summer because it's really hot and there's like no rain, I literally think they'll somehow find a way to like blame it on immigrants. And it's really frustrating because they will just skew the figures to fit the narrative that they want to
Well, they often use
push.
a think tank called the Center of Migration Control. The name sort of gives it away. And lots of right-wing press and GB News have cited this as the gospel. It's very, very anti-migrant in the sentiment. But as Lewis Aaron has done some deep dive on it, the Center of Migration Control, their numbers are basically fudged. And the person who started that think tank was a member of Reform. So there's a political agenda there. So, but you know why? I mean, we don't need to say it. There's a reason why corporate media and billionaire-owned media talk about immigration, is because they don't want to talk about inequality. They don't want to talk about the rich not paying their taxes. They don't want to talk about wages. In terms of small businesses, though, like small businesses are also facing a burden. That's true. The national insurance hike was obviously a burden. And I actually think for a good economy, and the left wing should be making the case for tax cuts for small businesses. But beyond that, taxes are not the main thing that's holding people back and businesses back. Small businesses are subject to the same oil prices, for example. So when it comes to bills, when they shoot up, businesses have to pay for that. They're also subjected to rents. They're subjected to commercial rent. So if you want to help small businesses, you want to make sure you cut out the middleman. So abolish landlords, have the state not just rent out housing to people to live in, but also state owns commercial properties to keep rents low for small businesses. That would go a long, long way. Renationalize our oil, so we can artificially bring down prices. These are huge expenditures that small businesses have to deal with. And guess what? The right-wing media and GB News, who say they care about businesses, who say they care about small businesses and entrepreneurship, right? They never talk about that. They'll talk about taxes. And the reason why they only talk about taxes is because they want to manufacture consent to cut taxes across the board, i.e. for the wealthy. That's where they're going. That's where they're aiming for.